The day I found out my grandmother left me everything, I drove home with the windows down even though it was 42 degrees outside. I needed the cold. I needed something real against my skin because nothing about the last 2 hours had felt real. Grandma Ruth had been sick for a long time. We all knew it was coming, but when the estate attorney, a quiet man named Mr. Fielding, who wore the same brown cardigan every time I'd ever seen him, slid a folder across the mahogany desk and said, "She left the bulk of the estate to you, Celeste. The house in Vermont, the investment accounts, and the mineral rights on the Wyoming property. Combined value approximately $14 million. I actually laughed, out loud, in his office. He didn't even blink. I called my husband from the parking garage. He didn't pick up. I called again. Voicemail. I sent a text that said, "You're not going to believe this. Call me when you get a chance. Everything is okay. I just have news." I was smiling so hard my face hurt. I drove home thinking about what we could do. Pay off the mortgage, finally. Help my sister with her student loans. Maybe buy that piece of land outside of Asheville we'd looked at twice and talked about every winter like it was a dream we were saving for later. I was already building the whole thing in my head, story by story, room by room. My husband's truck was in the driveway when I got home. I noticed his mother's silver Lexus parked behind it, which was unusual for a Tuesday. I didn't think much of it. I grabbed my bag, walked up the front steps, and pushed open the door. They were both standing in the living room, not sitting. Like they'd been waiting. My husband, Nathan, had his arms crossed and his jaw set the way he gets when he's already decided something and is just waiting to tell you about it. His mother, Sandra, no, I have to stop. That's not her name. Her name is Vivian Cole. She has always reminded me of a woman who trained herself, sometime in her 40s, to smile without it reaching her eyes. She was doing that smile now. There was a manila envelope on the coffee table. "We need to talk," Nathan said. I remember thinking, he doesn't know about the inheritance yet. So whatever this is, it's something else. "Okay," I said. I set my bag down near the door. "What's going on?" He picked up the envelope and held it out to me. I opened it, divorce papers, fully prepared, already signed on his end. And beneath them a letter from an attorney I didn't recognize, a firm out of Charlotte, stating that the house had been sold. Closing was scheduled for the following Friday. The buyer was listed as a holding company I'd never heard of. I read the letter twice, then I looked up. "The house is sold," Nathan said. "I listed it 6 weeks ago. It closed last week. Technically, the paperwork just hadn't. It doesn't matter. The point is, you need to find somewhere else to go." I looked at Vivienne. She was examining her thumbnail. "You can't sell this house," I said. My voice came out quieter than I expected. "My name is on the deed." "Was," Nathan said. "I had it corrected. There was an error in the original filing. My attorney fixed it." I stood very still. The room had that particular kind of silence that happens right before something breaks. I could feel it pressing against the inside of my chest. "What error?" I said. He shrugged. Like it was nothing, like we were talking about a typo on a utility bill. "The deed should have only listed one owner. It's been updated." Vivienne finally looked up from her thumbnail. "Honey," she said in that voice, that particular voice she'd used on me for 6 years, the one that sounds like concern but is actually contempt. "It's really for the best. You two have been unhappy for a long time. I think deep down you know that." I almost laughed again. Here is what they didn't know. What no one in that room knew except me. 3 years ago, not 5, I want to be accurate. I've been over this timeline so many times I could recite it in my sleep. 3 years ago, I found a receipt in Nathan's jacket for a hotel in Raleigh. He'd told me he was in Charlotte for a conference. I didn't say anything. I put the receipt back. I went to the bathroom, sat on the edge of the tub for about 15 minutes, and then I made a decision. I'm a forensic accountant. I've spent 12 years helping companies find money that went missing. I know how to look. I know what to look for. And I know, more than most people, that when someone is hiding something financially, there's always a thread. You just have to be patient enough to pull it. So I started pulling. It took me 8 months to understand the full picture. Nathan had been siphoning from our joint accounts for 4 years, long before I found that receipt. Small amounts at first, 400 here, 800 there, routed through a personal account I didn't know existed, and then into a series of transfers that eventually landed in an LLC he'd formed in Delaware under a name I didn't recognize. His mother was listed as the registered agent. The LLC had purchased 2 properties, one in the Outer Banks, one in Scottsdale. Neither one appeared anywhere in our shared financial picture. The deed transfer, the correction, I found evidence of that too about 6 months in. He'd used a notary who had since retired and moved out of state. The signature was a clean forgery of mine. I had it verified by a handwriting expert, a woman named Dr. Hayworth who works out of a firm in Richmond and does not mess around. I also found out about his girlfriend. Her name is Mira. She's 29. She works in commercial real estate, which is probably how he learned enough about property transfers to feel confident doing what he did. I don't hate Mira, honestly. She probably thinks he's available. She doesn't know he used the same tone of voice with me for 3 years. You're imagining things. You're paranoid. You need to stop working so much. You're not fun anymore. To keep me off balance while he dismantled everything we built. By the time I had everything I needed, I had a file. An actual physical file, 3.5 inches thick, sitting in a fireproof safe in my office at work. Copies of everything were with my attorney, a woman named Ms. Brewer, who had been practicing family law and financial fraud for 27 years, and who, when I first laid everything out on her conference table, leaned back in her chair and said quietly, "He really thought you wouldn't look," I told her. "He thought I was too tired." She smiled at me. "Well," she said, "let's make sure the looking was worth it." The plan was almost set when I found out about Grandma Ruth. I want to be honest about this part. The inheritance wasn't in the plan, I hadn't expected it. And when Miss Fielding said 14 million, my first thought, I'm embarrassed to say this but it's true, was oh, Nathan is going to be so upset he pulled this too early. Because that's what he'd done. He'd gotten impatient. I stood in my living room holding those divorce papers and I understood it perfectly. He'd found out about Grandma Ruth's illness getting worse. Somebody told him, I have a guess, a cousin of mine who'd always liked Nathan more than she liked me, and he knew she was going to leave something significant to me, and he panicked. He moved too fast. He handed me those papers before he had the full picture. Is there something you want to say? Nathan asked. He was looking at me the way people look at someone they've already written off, impatient, slightly bored. No, I said. I folded the papers and put them back in the envelope. I'll have my attorney look at these. Vivienne made a small sound, not quite a laugh. Of course you will. I'll need a few days to arrange accommodations, I said. You have until Sunday, Nathan said. I nodded. I picked up my bag. I walked to the kitchen, got a glass of water, drank it at the counter while looking out the window at our backyard. The raised beds I'd built, the Japanese maple I'd planted the first spring we moved in. And then I walked back through the living room, said goodnight to both of them, and went upstairs to our bedroom. Nathan slept on the couch that night. I'm not sure where Vivienne went. I lay in the dark and I thought about my grandmother, who had raised me for 4 years when my mother was sick, who used to let me sit in her kitchen and do homework while she made soup from scratch every Sunday. She'd never trusted Nathan. She'd said it to me once, directly, about 2 years into our marriage. That man is always calculating something. You can see it in his eyes. I'd told her she was wrong. I apologized to her in the dark for that. Then I texted Ms. Brewer. She replied at 6:45 the next morning. Ready when you are. The FBI had been involved for about 3 months by that point. I want to be clear about how that happened because I've seen people online act like calling federal law enforcement is something you just do casually. It isn't. But when your forensic evidence shows that your husband used forged documents to execute a fraudulent property transfer in a state other than the one you live in, and when the money trail crosses state lines, and when the LLC he formed received what appeared to be rent payments from both properties that were never reported on a joint tax return. That's not just a divorce matter, that is federal. Ms. Brewer had a contact. The contact had a supervisor. The supervisor looked at the file and asked me to come in. I went in, twice. Both times I sat in a conference room with 2 agents, a man named Agent Dillon and a woman who introduced herself only as Agent Torres, and I walked them through every document, every transfer, every timestamped notation I'd made over 3 years of very careful watching. They were good listeners. They didn't seem impressed or surprised. They just asked questions and wrote things down. The Sunday Nathan had given me as a deadline, I didn't leave. He came upstairs at 10 in the morning and knocked on the bedroom door. When I didn't answer, he opened it. I was sitting in the chair by the window with a cup of coffee. I said Sunday, he said. I heard you. I'm not leaving, I said. Not today, not like this. His expression shifted, not to anger exactly, more like the look of someone who realizes they miscalculated. You are aware that I can have you removed. By whom? I asked. Because legally, Nathan, I still own half this house. The deed transfer you filed is fraudulent. The notary who witnessed my signature has already been contacted by federal investigators and he's cooperating fully. So I'd be very careful about who you call. He went very still. The LLC, I said. The one you registered in Delaware, in your mother's name. The properties in the Outer Banks in Scottsdale. The account at First Coastal you opened in March 4 years ago. The one you've been moving money into in increments small enough to avoid automatic reporting flags. I paused. I know about all of it. I've known for 2 years. He sat down on the edge of the bed. He actually sat down, which I hadn't expected. Celeste, he said. His voice had changed. It was smaller now. Listen, whatever you think you found, I didn't think, I said. I documented. The knock at the front door came about 40 minutes later. I heard Vivienne answer it. I heard the pause. And then I heard her voice go up about half an octave in a way I'd never heard from her before. Because Vivienne Cole did not lose composure, except apparently she did, actually, when 2 federal agents and a local sheriff's deputy were standing on her son's front porch. I stayed in the bedroom until I heard Nathan go downstairs. Then I stood up, straightened my sweater and walked down after him. Agent Torres nodded at me when I came into the living room. She looked exactly the same as she had in that conference room, calm, unhurried, like she had all the time in the world. Nathan was already being read his rights. I watched his face while it happened. I've tried to figure out how to describe the expression he had, and the closest I can get is, he looked like someone who had been running a very long con and had finally, after many years, run out of road. Vivienne tried to interrupt twice. Agent Dillon told her, with extraordinary patience, that she needed to stay where she was. You did this, she said to me. She wasn't whispering. You're destroying your own family. He destroyed it, I said. I just kept the records. They took Nathan out to the car. They had questions for Vivienne too. The LLC, her role as registered agent, her signature on several documents related to the property purchases. She didn't go quietly. She said things I won't repeat here, not because they hurt me, but because they weren't original. People who've run out of real things to say start recycling old insults, and hers were borrowed from a script she'd been running since the first Thanksgiving I missed because I had to work, and she told Nathan I clearly didn't take the family seriously. The Outer Banks property was frozen within 48 hours. The Scottsdale property followed. The Delaware LLC was dissolved by court order. The Charlotte attorney who had filed the fraudulent deed transfer, a man named Mr. Haynes who apparently did not ask many questions when the money was good, lost his license and was facing his own set of charges. The divorce was finalized 7 months later. The settlement accounted for the missing money, both properties and damages for the fraudulent transfer. My attorney had asked for an amount that felt audacious to me when she first said it. The judge awarded more. Nathan pled guilty to wire fraud and tax evasion. He was sentenced to 31 months. Vivienne reached a plea agreement on the lesser charge of being an accessory after the fact. She avoided prison but lost the Scottsdale property, which had been partially funded through her own accounts. Mira, for what it's worth, had already ended things with Nathan by the time the charges were filed. According to a mutual acquaintance, she found out about me the same week I found out about the hotel receipt. We were both waiting, just for different things. I moved into a rental in Carborough while everything was being finalized. Small place, 2 bedrooms, a little back deck that got afternoon sun. I put a bird feeder out there on the second day and I'd sit with my coffee in the mornings before work and watch the chickadees. It sounds small. It was actually enormous. The Vermont house, Grandma Ruth's house, I didn't sell. I drove up there in October, first time since the funeral, and I walked through all the rooms, and I sat in the kitchen where she used to make soup. And I thought about what it means to be handed something by someone who loved you enough to see you clearly when you couldn't see yourself. She'd known. I think she always knew I'd eventually figure it out. She just made sure I'd have somewhere to land when I did. I'm not someone who believes in perfect endings. I don't think my life turned into a clean story just because Nathan got what he deserved and I got what was mine. I still have days where I go over the timeline in my head and feel the anger fresh, like it just happened. I still sometimes drive past the old house, sold now to a young couple. I've seen them out front, and feel something I can't fully name. But I also know this, the moment he stood in that living room and handed me those papers with that particular look on his face, the one that said, "You're too tired, too soft, too ordinary to fight back," he was wrong about me in every way that matters. I wasn't tired. I was ready. And the house he sold? It never belonged to him at all.